Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of StreamTime Sports. My name is Chris Stone, the community lead, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, in the spirit of the Winter Olympics, you went on a holiday to show your Olympic prowess. So I'm seeing you right now. I don't see any crutches. I don't see any casts. So I'm assuming you went on a successful ski holiday.
I did. I tell you what, it was incredible timing to go on a skiing trip. By luck, I didn't actually plan it this way, but to go on a ski holiday whilst the Winter Olympics was on. It was such a cool experience. So I went out, have a break, because I went with the family, right, with couple of young kids. We had quite a few breaks. And to go back to where we were staying and then, let's just put on some more skiing, and got right into the energy of it all, which was really fun. Plus the fact that these days I have 3 teams to root for. Technically 4, I'd even say, if you want to count Jamaica in there, when they're going on the bobsled, but that wasn't on, but with Australia, Great Britain, and Sweden. So always something to cheer on. But no, it was a great holiday. Minus 20 something at one stage in one morning, and consistently minus 10. But otherwise, my first time. So I've been snowboarding for years, but first time I went skiing, got the kids into skiing and stuff as well. And came out the other side with no injuries, and having a really good time, and a bit annoyed that I hadn't tried skiing earlier, because I found it way easier than snowboarding to get up and running. So it was a lot of fun, and got me right into the thick of the Olympic spirit and watching the Winter Olympics. I watched more sports in that week, even though I was busy on the slopes, than I have pretty much for the last 6 to 12 months.
Well, I was going to ask if you had the kids skiing or snowboarding, and I don't know what it's like in America. I've only ever skied in Europe a couple times. I will tell you right now, there's nothing more humbling than watching a 3-year-old French kid going through ski lessons, just bombing it straight past you as like a grown adult, trying to learn to ski. And you just see these 3-4-year-olds just going by with absolutely no fear straight down the mountain. It is genuinely one of the most humbling things I've ever had, Nick.
Well, I had that to some extent, but not so young. But my kids are 8 and 5, and my 8-year-old, like on day 3, I thought I was doing pretty well, and we got on one of these runs. It was like a blue run, and he just bombed her straight down. He didn't turn, just went straight down. And he flew down. I was trying to catch him, and I eventually found him somewhere along the way. He's just there waving at me at the end of the run. That was a pretty good reminder, just to how I'm not going to be able to keep up with them as they get better and better. And sure enough, it got more difficult as we went along. But I got into it. Loads of fun. I'd say what I experienced in terms of the skiing versus snowboard debate, because there's a lot of debate about that. Firstly, when you got a couple of young kids, you have to ski, because you're going to be dragging them around on skis, even worse with a snowboard. So unless you go to the right type of places with loads of lifts, also there's loads of the button lifts and anchor lifts, which are just so much easier with a set of skis than with a snowboard. They're not built for ski slopes, aren't really built for snowboarders. So your snowboarders are living in a skier's world, unfortunately, and I've had to deal with that for a long time. So skiing was almost necessity, just because I had to drag around a couple of young kids. But by then it was a lot of fun, and I did a couple of small runs, even with my 5-year-old on one of the runs where I went down, took the wrong turn, and taking down a much more difficult run. They're like, all right, well, we're just going to have, there's only one way we can do this, is get down and do the best we can. But loads of fun. So I had a great time, and then got a chance to consume a load of the Olympics, and for my first time watching it from Sweden as well.
Well, the nice thing about the Olympics is, because it's so long and there's so many events and so diverse, you actually always get these really weird stories that you don't think are going to come up, Nick. I remember at the Paris Olympics, it was the Norwegian swimmer, I think, who went viral for raiding all of the chocolate muffins in the canteen area. Do you remember that, Nick?
I don't remember that, but that sounds like something I would do.
I'm telling you, it went viral. Go look up a Norwegian swimmer and French pastries. It was the fun thing. And I think this Olympics, what I've covered, it's a sport I'm very passionate about, only once every 4 years. But the Canadians, both the men and women's team, have now been implicated for cheating in the curling. And just again, not one of these stories we predicted coming out of the Olympics, but it's all over.
It has been all the news here, and the Canadians have been absolutely mocked by every creator, social influencer, broadcaster network, expert, whatever you name it. They are copying it from all ends. Luckily, they probably don't understand what's being said about them, because it is pretty ruthless in the Swedish media here, and obviously it's keep manifesting, because there's been more instances since, which is being speculated of being cheating. But I actually wonder. This is definitely there's a risk of recency bias here, but just I feel like I enjoy the Winter Olympics more than the Summer Olympics. I'm not sure. It could be recency bias, but the curling's great. Some of the skiing stuff you see is just some of extraordinary. Some of the tricks and thrills and spills, and every single winter event that I can think of, it has such jeopardy attached to it. Like one little slip of the ski or the skate or whatever can end in disaster. I don't know. There just feels like there's something more to it than some of the summer events, but that could absolutely be because I just was immersed in skiing on the slopes and whatnot. And also seeing Australia do it pretty well. Actually, I got a few messages from people saying, "How was Australia so good?" And most people don't even realize there is actually ski fields where I came from. That's actually when I went skiing or snowboarding the first time. There's a nice little pocket in Australia which has, I think, one ski field that has over 50 lifts at it, so it's quite a big setup. So yeah, definitely enjoyed it. Now, but what I would say is I have a darker side, more negative side around the Winter Olympics that I wanted to bring up, which was linked with. So there's a couple of things going on here. I have started reading Michael Payne's book. I don't know if you're familiar with Michael Payne, but he was basically the media and marketing director of the IOC for 20 odd years. He was pre Timo Lume, who we've had on the podcast before. Mainly involved initially around the sponsorship and the evolution of the commercial proposition and how they monetize the IOC. It's been a really interesting read, and reading that plus and all the nuances around the media rights deals and the sponsorship deals that happen and how those events have been delivered over time, whilst being able to watch it live and then whilst experiencing skiing live, has been quite a full, like, immersive experience, I would say, consuming it all. What has made it so successful has been its presence on free-to-air TV. It grabs the whole nation, the patriotism behind it, and with that in place, has allowed the Olympics to absolutely immerse itself into all of news conversation, particularly in where I'm in Sweden. You can't get away from it. It's all people are talking about. But over time, it's got me reflecting a little bit of what's happened with the Olympics and then some other stuff that's been going on. So, firstly, there's speculation around where the Olympics is going in terms of its commercial growth or lack of it. The last financial numbers that came out showed a massive dip in the sponsorship revenue that they were creating. And I won't go into too much detail because I could go on forever about that alone. But the top sponsorship model is being hugely regarded by across the industry for its success up to this point. But over time, you link with what the success of that was, again, that global reach, and then the growth of pay TV and the fragmentation of those rights has created, I think it's sort of led to the IC, I think, the Olympic movement, perhaps losing a little bit, not all of it, but like just a little bit, because I'm still right into it, but a little bit of its like impact, because maybe those rights and the visibility aren't what they used to be because there is more money coming from the pay TV sort of world. And my experience in Sweden has been a bit of a challenge. So when I was watching it, I think this is coming back to something that I think might be interesting to the audience, is how they've approached it here. Firstly, there's two of the major public broadcasters have a good chunk of the rights. I haven't actually looked it up. I think HBO Max might have some because of their links with Discovery. But so TV4. So firstly, I was watching in the place I was staying, and they only didn't have a smart TV, so it was only linear channels. So the first time I'd watched just linear for, gosh, I don't know how long. SVT channels 1 and 2, and then TV4 on channel 4. But then there was other channels on TV on the 7th channel and the 12th channel where there was also broadcasting. And then sometimes SVT had another channel which used to be sometimes the child's channel, and sometimes a channel they had. I think this time I watched they had the Swedish rally, because the rally's also going on at the moment. So there was 6 different places for me to look what was potentially on TV and what was not. And sometimes there'd be live Olympics, sometimes there wouldn't be. And so I was getting so lost in like trying to find where to watch that stuff. But that's one thing. And then I was like, okay, well, when I got home, I was like, let's put on my smart TV and see what the experience is like on the apps and on the platforms. And then TV4 doesn't have the live broadcasting of its channels available on the app. And in fact, they were charging a premium subscription, a plus package, to access the live feed of the Olympics on their channels. But I was watching that for free on my own linear TV before. So it just creates this mishmash of like, okay, well, there's some rights here being protected that aren't available, but they are available on linear. If you have an old TV, you can watch it, or just a TV that's connected to other channels. And it's just really fragmented, really bitty. And I think in this day and age, you have to just make everything as accessible and easy to navigate as possible. And I found that just incredibly frustrating and difficult. Now, I need to look up quickly if HBO Max over here if anyone else does have the rights to the Winter Olympics, because if they do, I've not seen it marketed once to me other than the public broadcasters in TV4 and SVT. And that for me just feels like a massive missed opportunity. Like I should be a perfect person they should be targeting for this stuff, right? You would think. So I found I walked away being just very frustrated that I wasn't able to get my head around where and how to watch stuff. It was just all over the place. Surely there has got to be a better way this day and age. And I think the knock-on effect of all of this is that the downward trend that the IOC has seen lately in sponsorship is a little bit linked with this bitty nature of their rights being visible in a bunch of different places. And I had a quick look, by the way, and Warner Brothers Discovery do have it. But for me, not to have seen them market it once is bonkers and such a missed opportunity for them.
I find that really interesting because I don't think the Olympics is alone in that. Because I remember last summer, completely different broadcaster, completely different sport, completely different in terms of legacy. I don't remember seeing any or much of all of any Club World Cup advertising in the lead up to it. And even the World Cup is currently, we're still 4 months away from the World Cup, but it still feels like I've not necessarily heard a ton about the World Cup either. It does feel like some major events, the marketing doesn't seem like they've necessarily been there. So it is interesting you mentioned the Winter Olympics on this, but I felt very similar about the Club World Cup that like I followed it because I'm really into sports, but like I don't know how the casual would have ever found that from just what I experienced in the UK.
Exactly. And I think this comes back to this fundamental challenge we are seeing across the industry. And I think it's almost a naivety that there's a general growth in content consumption in the world. Every statistic shows that, right? Across whatever medium you want to talk about. If you aggregate all those mediums, more content is being consumed than ever. So different services see that growth and think they are succeeding right now. But my perspective is this issue here, this example we've given about the lack of advertising and marketing of the fact that it's visible in multiple places is something that I think I've consistently seen. It's almost like these broadcasters are just relying on the fact they've got those rights as the marketing investment for them to get people on the platform. And to some extent, I get that. But by not further investing in heavily marketing to people who consume sports content on social channels and other channels alike on a regular basis, how am I not getting it thrown in my face at all times to be consuming it on HBO Max and to know where to go and how to consume it? I think that's where, again, it's just like creates a little bit of user tension that is going to push me away from consuming it. I gave up last night trying to watch it, and I really wanted to watch it, but I just wasn't really, I'm not going to buy a plus package, especially from TV4, I'm sorry, when I know I can watch it for free on my linear TV. I just need to set up my linear channels, and I couldn't be bothered to that point because I never thought I needed to. And I think this is a consistent problem that I think that I see has to deal with because they've been finding that balance between taking in the pay TV checks and getting those free-to-air deals. And maybe, again, this is that more existential issue, just getting it to as many eyeballs as possible and doubling down on sponsorship revenue as the core play again, getting as much reach and making sure you've got a single destination that everyone can get and immerse themselves in the Olympic movement. Because that's what I was looking for yesterday and I couldn't find it.
And to be clear, this isn't just an Olympics thing. It might just feel exacerbated because the Olympics is only on, we'll call it once every 2 years, but each edition of the Olympics is every 4 years. That there probably is that pressure to feel like you got to get as much money out of it as you can because you don't have that cyclical nature on a year-to-year basis. But we've also talked about, is the NFL potentially headed that way? Because it used to be the NFL is historically free to air, but now it's a Netflix subscription, it's the Amazon Prime subscription, it's a YouTube TV subscription. You need a Peacock subscription. Like more and more of it's actually being put behind a paywall, and the money might be coming in, but does that create long-term issues down the road that are harder to spot? Because in the short term, you're making the money, but I've made the same argument. I would love for there to be a one game a week on BBC for the Premier League instead of having everything exclusively behind a paywall. Is that part of the reason why European fixtures or European media rights for football leagues is going down? Because so much of it's hard to see. I don't know. That's a little bit of, lick your finger, stick it up and see if the wind blows that way. But I don't disagree, Nick. I think there's something to the fact that the more difficult stuff is to find, that does just create more tension, that maybe takes a longer time to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and look, it's easy for me to throw stones here, but it's some context here is that Warner Brothers Discovery, they have the rights, the exclusive rights across Europe for the Winter Olympics and the Summer Olympics, the Olympics in overall, and then they have to sub-license those rights out to different broadcasters. That's part of the mandate and their approach. They wanted all those rights, and then they're going to sub-license them out. They've been doing that for a long time, and they've got it till I think 2032. I think is the number that they've got to work with. And so they do deals with like the EBU, which is connected with public service broadcasters, and that's how this all comes to play. And so I think Warner Bros. Discovery had a very smart approach to it all, but I still think in this day and age, the Olympics is being so limited by this approach, particularly across Europe, that they are missing a big opportunity and could come out the other side of this right cycle with just some real challenges on rebuilding that inertia and an excitement and momentum around it in a really hotly contested marketplace. But that being said, as I was pointing out before, every news outlet, every social creator, etc., that I'm across social media across Sweden is talking about the Winter Olympics. So there's a load of conversation, loads of highlights being shared. So there's plenty of conversation being had. But I still feel like the issues that they're having, back to the business side here more further, is that the reason they might be having a dip with that sponsorship mix is that maybe sponsors might be a little bit disappointed with how their visibility is being made across those platforms. Because remember that if you're a big sponsor of the Olympics, your brand visibility is not very high. Actually, you have them on the back of certain media drops, but you don't have them on any of the signage in the venues during live events at all. There's no branding at all. Like, imagine the value of those advertising boards if they decided to flip the script there. Gosh, they'd be worth billions. And imagine if they went to a geolocated model like they do in football, where like Supiner and those others do it. That the value of those is clearly significant, and they've been able to lead on the exclusivity play for a long time. But who knows? Maybe the tension and pressure might come soon where they have to flip the script on that.
That's 100% something I was thinking when you're going through that first initial bit, when you talked about like the Tops program worked really well when linear was just the world, and the degree of personalization wasn't possible. But you start thinking about today, talking about the experience in Sweden is going to be different than the experience in the US. One of the things I found really interesting is, like, at least in my experience with NFL Game Pass, they've yet to give me UK based commercials. They're still just showing me the American commercials. Like, imagine to your point whether DAZN's doing that, or the Olympics to your point was able to all of a sudden start doing that. Because in theory, you'd like to think the technology's got to be close to that. We've spoken to enough people in the dynamic ad space that would tell you it's possible to do that. What could you possibly do if you could all of a sudden, especially for such a global event, to be able to start personalizing that and just adding a little bit more advertisement money instead of just relying on those big global brands?
Yeah, because the global brand approach that the IOC has taken to this point relies on just big, massive deals being struck. And they have to really get brands to buy into being connected with the movement of the Olympics and that position that they've taken. And it's a really strong story. But it means that there is innately a lot of revenue being left on the table, a lot of inventory not being used, and a lot of space to, I guess, for brands to come into play. And now a lot of people will talk about the Olympics being what's so prestigious about it is it's such a clean experience. There's no brands involved, and I do think there's definitely some value in that. But I just think you're going to see more pressure as if revenue continues to dip on the sponsorship program, that you might see them needing to make a change at some point. And final point I'll make on this is that over time, and again, reading Michael's book, which I'm halfway through now. It is a really great read for anyone who's in the industry. What's it called? I've brought it. It's Fast Track and Dark Deals. Fast Tracks and Dark Deals.
All right,
Is what
fair
it's
play.
called. So
Intriguing title.
yeah, and it's been great. But my point was going to say that back in the day when they launched the top program and were able to lean in that the messaging that they had then, the sponsors, what they were paying for back then were visibility and the ability to activate and tell stories around their connection with the property. And the IC did an incredible job of like protecting that at all costs, so the brand's got immense value. But now we've seen it in countless times. Brands are now paying for content. They're paying for storytelling. They're paying for moments and emotions and something that no advertisements or no brand positioning can buy alone. And that's where I think you're going to have to see more brand connectivity into the Olympic experience at some stage if they want to keep growing that sponsorship pipe, because without it, I don't think there's enough there unless the IC can really open up the floodgates on content creation themselves to really bring that to life and to basically maximize the sponsorship dollars that they need to keep funding and distributing their revenue across athletes and national Olympic committees across the world.
Well, Nick, that might be a really nice segue to talk about our most recent StreamTime Connect event. You've heard us talk about our StreamTime community in the past. Quick summary. It's something we've built off the back of the podcast, given how many of you have reached out to us and put on a series of events that take place not only at our core events like New York, SP London, SP Media Awards, but also hosting smaller events. And the whole purpose of them is to be a little bit smaller, more intimate, give people the opportunity to really connect with decision makers. Because, we recognize, hey, come to Sports Pro Madrid, come to Sports Pro New York next month. They're great. But there's also something nice about having a smaller, more intimate event. We just had our most recent one at the TikTok offices. And Nick, the big question around all of that, and Nick wearing his merch branded, I didn't wear mine. I should do, but it's a big puffer jacket. It's too warm to be wearing inside. But what we talked about during that event, Nick, and maybe it's a nice little segue into this, the main theme of it was, is social media and non-live content a value add or a value gap to live content? Basically, the argument being, does all the content around live sports actually create a distraction, taking away the value that broadcasters are paying for, or does it add value to it? And I'll be honest, Nick, I think maybe a little biased because this is what TikTok was wanting to talk about. So sort of TikTok is obviously going to want to push across the message that, hey, we're a value add. We're not taking away. So for us, I think going into there's like, okay, we know this is what you want to talk about because you do want to, frame yourself as adding to the value, not taking away from it. And that was sort of the purpose of the conversation. Maybe that leads nicely. We're talking about the Olympic side of things with the content creators and, how do you drive value to the live content? And Nick, there are some pretty big stats from that. And I'll quickly run through some of the stats that they shared in a presentation they put together. They said in 2025, there were 5 trillion sports video views, which is just a bonkers number. 19 of their 25 most followed publishers were sports accounts, which actually really surprised me because, there's so much on TikTok. The fact that sports is so popular, I found a bit interesting. 64% of women choose TikTok as their go-to sports content platform, which again is really interesting for the right people, depending on how you're trying to use it. 42% of fans, according to their statistics, were more likely to tune into live matches after consuming content on TikTok. And then the one case study example they used, which I think is really the important part, and we referenced it earlier, was DAZN's Club World Cup coverage and using their game plan feature. They said that they managed to drive from TikTok to DAZN's platforms through like an affiliate link, approximately 500,000 signups on DAZN through TikTok. They claimed that they could, sort of take credit for pushing people there in terms of the funnel. So this whole conversation around, is it a value gap? Is it a value add? Nick, there's a ton of statistics in there, but I guess maybe before we go into some of the stats there, what's your general take in terms of, is social media and content a value gap or a value add?
Where to go with this one? I reflect on the conversation I had with Rob Pilgrim a while back from Meta's perspective, and I think it links with this one, where he was suggesting that, have we got it all back to front? Basically, have we got it so where's the real value in the conversation around sports or just around sports content? Is it the live event, or is it all the storytelling around it, the non-live stuff, the stuff that gets what we were talking about for the Canadian curling and all those other moments that happen around those events that I've watched countless highlights and examples of. And platforms like TikTok do a great job of making that stuff accessible, serving it to people's channels, people's platforms. And my enthusiasm and engagement with the sport is so much higher because of it's serving me that than it would be by just relying on like the linear feed of content alone. And the fact that the revenue that's funding this whole ecosystem around media is built around a broadcaster buying the rights and then trying to monetize it through selling subscriptions or advertising. This feels like such a leaky bucket in this day and age that I don't know if I'd call social media a value add in terms of from a broadcaster's perspective, but certainly from a rights owner's perspective, they need to be so focused on how they ensure that their visibility and content is made available as many ways as possible on the platform, and being part of the conversation with fans and consumers and passive fans that might not be interested in that sport, like we are talking about curling today. I think social media's role is incredibly important. It is super interesting to see and hear TikTok talk specifically about driving signups to the platform. Now, that's been a really interesting takeaway I took from the event, was this focus around being basically like a bit of an affiliate marketer, I'd call it. I'm sure they wouldn't like me calling them that, but basically they are measuring how much business they are driving to DAZN as a platform. And that's not something we've had around social media for quite some time. In fact, ever really, in terms of something that you've heard shared from major social media outlets previously. So for me, that's just a big play here. Is like, why have they made this announcement? Why have they made this statement about signups and being open to sharing that? And DAZN was on stage to talk about that and show their support for how important and valuable working with TikTok has been to driving signups to their own channels. And the more that social can play a very direct line of consumers, signups, subscribers, etc., to the platform, then innately the more beneficial it does become to broadcasters. Sorry, to broadcasters and platforms who are publishing and promoting on that platform and need a way to funnel audiences, casual fans, to their platform. So I think it's pretty significant that they are intentionally positioning themselves as such, and that DAZN's also pretty willing to share those numbers and to shout about it, because it is potentially a real needle mover if other broadcasters and other streamers can directly attribute sign-ups, subscribers, etc., coming to the platforms as a result of what they're doing on social.
Well, I've shared this story before, but I think it ties into this. And we also had the head of content for the European tour there, and we spoke about golf feels like it is someone that's really leaning into this space, whether it's the DP World Tour or it's the PGA Tour or it's the individual golfers themselves like Bryson DeChambeau or, Grant Horvath, all the different content creators. It really feels like golf's doing an excellent job of this. And, for me, using that stat TikTok had, it wasn't via TikTok, it was via YouTube, the whole, 42% more likely to watch live content. I, for the first time ever, went and watched the U.S. Open live because I'd watched Bryson DeChambeau. And then I went on to watch the Ryder Cup, stuff I'd never done before, purely because I'd watched content outside of it. So I do think, to your point, there's probably differences, whether the broadcasters or the rights holders call it a value gap or a value add, but there's certainly, I watch content now I wouldn't have watched before. And similarly, things like fantasy sports. Nick, I would never watch Bundesliga football. Sorry, Andreas Hayden. I know you're not technically DFL anymore, but I wouldn't necessarily be watching Bundesliga football if I wasn't also into so rare and fantasy sports, where again, a non-live piece of content, we can use an NFL example. I would never watch the Raiders play football if I didn't own Brock Bowers in fantasy football. And again, this, fantasy football is a type of content that is a value add because it makes me interested or gets me invested into something I would otherwise never normally watch. Like there might be people that are going to go watch the curling final because they want to see if Canada really is cheating, stuff like that. Like it drives appeal.
They're feeding each other. I think that the linear and the live broadcast actually feeding the social media engagement, because people are walking away and want to keep in touch with what they're seeing and have seen on TV. and social is able to keep them in touch. They want to go back to it again and watch it later. And so that kind of like two-way dynamic is essential for the sport and for the broadcaster to continue to engage audiences and keep them interested for something that takes a number of weeks to be delivered. It's not a one-off event happening for 2 hours, right? We're talking about something that happens over a long period of time. How do you constantly keep fans interested, at least when we're talking about the Winter Olympics as it stands? So, or the FIFA World Cup or the FIFA Club World Cup, etc., which was the example that we pointed at. So, look, I think social media's got a hugely important role. I think it plays the most important role in terms of building fandom. I think the notion that the live sporting event is the thing that builds fandom, it has such an important role if you watch live sports. But I think highlights and non-live plays a bigger one. To your point around, you've been consuming YouTube golf streamers and that made you watch. That's a great example of where you've watched something that's not live and has driven you to the live experience. It's a secondary step, but you've become more of a fan because of the non-live content you were creating. It wasn't the live that was the fuel to your fandom necessarily. It was actually the other way around. And I think that is really where we're at today. I think highlights, non-live, and the storytelling around it, the unique angles, which they pointed to a couple of those, which we'll talk about perhaps in a second, are the things that are really getting people excited about a sport or something to watch. And a live event can be, but we've talked about, and I've talked about before in presentations and no doubt on this podcast, that in many ways, I think that live sports is often the second screen experience when people are watching. They're on their phones, whether they're doing something completely different or they are talking with friends or whatever about the experience, but they are focused on what's happening on their phone first. And the live sports experience at times, not always, is the secondary screen in their life at that moment. It's not always just because live sports is on. It's always the first screen, the priority for everyone at every single moment. And that's just the reality of things. So that dynamic between social media and its role to drive people, but also its social media and its role during a live sporting experience is so complex that I'm not really sure who's like winning here or who's maximizing who from whose perspective. But it is really interesting that TikTok and Meta and YouTube, these big tech platforms, are all really going and gunning after sports right now. At least that's what it feels like, given everything we've seen and heard so far.
And in terms of the overall day, was there anything that stood out to you? We had DAZN coming in talking about what they were doing from a platform perspective. Game plan was something that was referenced multiple times both by TikTok and DAZN. It's a TikTok product, but DAZN was using it for the Club World Cup. We also had the head of content from the the DP World Tour coming in talking about how they're using content creators, because we have talked about some of the content they're producing and sort of where you balance out your budgets, because live is where the money is. But as you talked about, do you need the non-live to push the live? I thought it was interesting. TikTok sort of said, we know they've experimented with some live streaming. They didn't sound like, hey, we're going to make a big push for live streaming. I think it more came across, if the numbers line up and someone wants to do it, we can. But there certainly don't seem like they're trying to be pushing for live vertical streaming, which I'm not saying I'm surprised by that, but like it was something that, was specifically commented on. But was there anything else in particular that stood out to you from any of the speakers?
Yeah, that was definitely an interesting thing. I remember asking Dominic Burns on that, and he definitely made it sound like the focus doesn't need to be the live product. It is just creating great content for the platform, and live is, they will be happy to help you, but focus on just creating the best content possible for the platform. There were a couple of anecdotes that came out of it. One was that Dominic Burns, who's basically leading up their TikTok business from a European perspective, particularly around sports, was basically stating that I think it was something like that the traditional highlights need to be immediate. They have to be out the door straight away. They can't wait 24 hours to get it out, get on platform. Like that used to be the case, but it isn't anymore. So you need to get that stuff out ASAP. And actually what had been working through the Club World Cup, secondary to that, the stuff that was done a bit later was the more unique versions of content, which is not too surprising, but like RefCam was the main thing that really worked there. And European Tour absolutely talked about the player content or the player-led content they've been creating as really driving engagement on their platform. What also struck me from the European Tour, the DP World Tour's perspective, most of the examples they pointed to were, again, not actually highlights. They were the innovative storytelling, some of it quite often sponsored content stuff, the innovative different shows and different concepts they've tried. And again, very player led, not their more traditional highlight stuff that's been driving huge numbers and huge audiences on those social media channels. So again, a little bit of like, what is that dynamic between a rights holder and how do they get value out of the platform? Taking a traditional approach will only get you so far.
I think that has to be the play. We didn't get a chance necessarily to talk about it at TikTok because we just did not have enough time. But interestingly, someone from AFTV was there, so we didn't even get to go into the AFTVs of the world, the Mark Goldbridges of the world, that are using platforms like TikTok and YouTube. But I think it just goes to show the breadth of the conversation that it actually is extensive. There's so many things we could have talked about. We still didn't even get a chance to go into. And I think to your point, we're probably trying too hard to credit one and discredit the other one. Really, there probably just needs to be an acceptance that the two really can't exist without the other.
Yeah, I think that's the summary here, is that they need each other. If you don't have a really solid TikTok strategy and you're a rights holder or a major broadcaster, you are shooting yourself in the foot. And TikTok and platforms like TikTok are going to work really closely with these types of properties to make sure they're getting maximum value out of it. We haven't talked much about it, but I'll quickly talk about Game Plan. That's a new product that they've launched, and they've partnered with FIFA around the World Cup on that product, which is a huge setup. But they're creating a destination for fans on the platform, which is obviously really interesting when you think about what TikTok is. It's a vertical video swiping platform, very simple to use, but they're actually creating destinations within TikTok now dedicated for live sporting events. That feels like a pretty significant commitment to sports. And I just wonder how far it'll go. Like, I wonder if we'll get to a point where TikTok says, well, I'll do a deal and commit to a major rights owner about having this game plan destination. And will some sports properties say, hey, we don't even need our own app anymore. We're just going to lean into this because it is comprehensive enough. I don't think we're there yet, but I think it could come to that point where TikTok, depending on the commitment and agreement they have in place, might really want to drive fans into TikTok through that as a gateway. Then what better way to create a single destination that is only available through TikTok? That would drive me to sign up to the Olympics if they had that relationship, and probably would from the World Cup. Currently, I don't use TikTok very often at all, but would I start using it? Yeah, I probably would if I wanted to get insight and access to what was going around the World Cup, and that was the only place I would go. So I think it could be just an interesting play for them to see if they can lean into it, and if it works and they actually drive people from just watching video and swiping up and down on content to actually staying on platform, reading editorial, watching highlights, checking medal tables, you name it. That's going to be a whole different diversification of the TikTok business and platform, that's for sure.
Well, in terms of speaking of building platforms, it's a shame we've only got 10 minutes to chat about it, but we need to talk about it because it is breaking news over the weekend and want to get out on it. Is the latest story with Ligue. We've talked about, it's felt like they've taken some positive steps with launching their own streaming platform and some of the early numbers in terms of subscriptions. They took a new approach to pricing. Then one of the things they wanted to do, and something that seems that others are doing, is like, you've got to add other content to your platform. And one of the things that looked like they had successfully been able to do was to negotiate to distribute the World Cup in France on their platform. Again, a great way, bit of stickiness to keep people through the off season going into the next season. But it looks like last minute they have been usurped in their bid to get World Cup rights by beIN, which is all the more complicated, I guess, Nick, because League One wasn't able to secure a deal with B1 as a domestic broadcaster. And then you also have to take into account who owns beIN are also the same people who own PSG, who also happens, I think, to be on one of the boards for UEFA or one of the big players associations. So essentially the owner of PSG is now doing something that's probably not in the best interest of the league that his team's in, but he's also the owner of the broadcaster. And like, maybe we ignore some of the stickiness, Nick, because there are some things in there, some webs being drawn up, but maybe just for this to instantly just react on what it means for Ligue 1 in terms of being able to, what could have been a really nice proposition value add to the platform over the summer, to now having that pulled out from under them.
Yeah, I mean, as I've written a post about this, and it's gotten a fair bit of traction. I've had a bunch of people messaging me about it as well. It just keeps, a new headline just keeps popping up almost every other week, every other month when it comes to Ligue and LFP. And I'm not necessarily going to just point my finger at LFP and LFP Media. I'm not sure they've done wrong here. And from a few sources I've heard from, it sounds like they may have been hard done by. So definitely, I think we can't just all say that they're being run badly and we're not in the room, we're not seeing what's going on behind the scenes. But it does feel a bit premature to make the announcement, whether or not there was a deal signed or not. If there was a way that FIFA could pull out of it and do it and get one-upped by their competitor, that feels like a massive miss by LFP, and they're basically, their boss has stepped down from that role. Now, from what I've heard from a couple of sources, is that them announcing it wasn't necessarily premature, in that they had signed some sort of agreement with FIFA, and it was ratified and it was good to go. But once that deal was agreed, somehow, some way, FIFA was able to strike a deal with beIN in the meantime. So from what I can hear and what I'm seeing, is that it sounds like that FIFA's gone and got another better deal once there's been a deal signed and finalized. Now, my suggestion would be, well, LFP, if that is the case, then you need to make sure you've got an agreement that doesn't allow that if you've signed the contract and commitment. But nevertheless, it doesn't sound great if FIFA has done this move to try and trick them. Now, who knows what beIN's done as well? Like, beIN might have come with an incredible offer. They've got the capabilities of blowing anyone out the water at any time, given who they're backed by. But it's just another messy situation. And whatever the case may be as to how we got here, you've got a situation where not only does the LFP, so Ligue, have a tense relationship with Canal Plus, the biggest basically sports broadcaster in the market, they now seem to have even more tension with beIN Sport. Again, to your point, the owner and chief exec of two PSG and then beIN are one and the same person. But that there must be even more tension in that relationship. So how do they resolve that so they can reset the marketplace and build up those relationships and get the visibility that they're crying for out of those different channels and platforms and media rights deals that they would be wanting to get? Without it, they're in a lot of trouble, and they're going to have to keep committing to this doing it themselves approach, which the jury will be out for quite a while as to whether they can really make it worth financially to get anywhere near where they were. I don't think they can ever can. So they're going through a big reset. So I feel sorry for the people at LFP if things have played out the way it seems to. But it is just another chapter in the ongoing saga that is Ligue and its domestic market.
So I won't ask the question of will we hear from this story again. Instead, I will ask the question, how put an over under on how soon you think the next chapter will come up, whether they sue to get the rights back, or because they're popping up every single day. So I won't ask the question of, well, will we hear again? I'll ask the question over under on when we'll hear again.
Oh gosh, it's a great question. I think we're going to see them in the headlines quite often because they make great headlines. Every story's been an absolute curveball. The media boss has stepped down, so who's going to step into that role? Will they be someone that is a bit outward and public facing as well, or will that be someone who will maybe keep their cards more closer to their chests and not allow the risk of what we've seen with this announcement a couple of weeks ago being drawn out, and now the about face that's happened by FIFA here. So yeah, I think you're going to see more of it. I now think I loved the move with them buying the FIFA World Cup rights and being able to mitigate the churn risk that comes with a seasonal proposition like they have, and would love to have seen what the results were. Now we won't see that. And there's nothing else that can play that role for them. Maybe they could lean into non-sports related content on the platform, but I think that would be a mistake. I think they need to now just do damage limitation and get everything else ready to market and try and drive the next wave of subscribers to the platform. And that's really all they can do for now. So it is a real shame. And who knows what will be next in that saga, but it's we'll be watching and following closely, that's for sure.
Yeah, we'll certainly be here to cover it. But thank you once again, everybody, for joining us for this episode of StreamTime Sports.